Hi, James.
Hey, Paul, how's it going?
Oh, good. How are you?
Good.
I think I'm supposed to be in this box here, but I'm not sure. So,
okay. Yeah, Pete and I did a quick run through earlier this morning, and
okay.
I think I've got an idea of how this will work out. Well, I'm kind of toggling around because I've only been on the other setup, trying to see if we can confirm like how many we've got on, who we've got on.
I think there's about 18 people, I think, if that icon is correct up there, or 20.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
So,
I think that's right.
Yeah, let me check and see here. Yeah. Yeah, there's some people out there. Good morning, everybody.
We can give everybody a minute or sort of transition over. I don't know how smooth it is on the front end of this, but I had to close all my browsers, log out, and then log back in so that I I made sure I actually got in okay. So,
yeah, there's a lot of that going on, it seems like, but I'm doing okay here with the laptop set up at least. So,
yeah, how are things going? I haven't talked to you in a little bit just because of everything else that people have had going on.
Right. Yeah, no, it's been busier, or it's been busy, and then it's just gotten a lot busier on the enforcement side for sure. Just this past week. So,
just so you know, Paul and James. So up in the top corner there, you're seeing 22 number in that eyeball.
I see it.
There's 22 or 21 people actually on watching us.
Okay.
Only 3 of us chose to share our screen and audio. So encourage everybody. Up to 20 people can be on screen and audio at the same time.
Sure.
And then also they can be in the chat if they, can't be, if they don't. So I'm not sure when you'll see people starting to get the navigation. So generally what you have to do is, you have to click on that share audio, that blue box at the top, and then you get a screen that says check your mic, check your audio. You have to accept that, and then I believe there's one more step after that you let them, they come through. So otherwise, you two guys, have a chat for a while, see if anybody comes in. Mary's got a few people in her room over on the educator side. We'll just keep this going for the next hour, and then we're going to start up at 11 with the last session. So see where that goes. James, that was great. I thought the session, you had a lot of information, and again, everybody must have had all their answers, all their questions answered during that.
That was one of the things that, like we were talking about this morning, a whole lot of topics in a narrow amount of time, and it's going to change between now and the end of the year. We'll have additional program stuff come up, but then also, especially on the inspector level, probably some other retirements as we get some clarity on what return to work actually looks like at the agency. Because that's right now for our field folks. They still have some flexibility, but if and when everybody is called back, at least for some of the people we've talked to within the bureau, it's been an enlightening year. So if you're happy being home, then you can swing it. We contemplate seeing a lot of retirements.
Yeah. If anybody is in the room that wants to join, just click on the share your video.
Yeah, and I guess in the meantime, James, if I could start with something.
Yeah, of course, go ahead.
On the enforcement side, normally for non-permitted sites, the open dumping sites, the open burning sites that we all have to go out and visit, and how to approach these things. I know usually it would be the administrative citation route. Maybe we might give an ACWN first, and if that doesn't solve it, sometimes maybe there'll be an administrative citation through the Pollution Control Board. Correct?
Correct. Yeah.
We're kind of investigating other avenues to approach some of these sites with. more so on the criminal side. And I was curious, I know there's some language in the act that deals with that we have that ability, or our state's attorney might have it, or the state attorney general has that ability to do that. Because I just personally, I feel sometimes the AC process is cumbersome and confusing and long, especially to get compliance through that. Mm-hmm. I just thought if you could speak to that for a little while.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's both the AC process and then the Section 31 process for violation notices. They're deliberate by design, but that can be a really frustrating design. I mean, there's a presentation Paul Eisenbrandt and I have done a couple of times that sort of highlights the amount of time that you can go through, and it's within the realm of possibility that you could observe a violation on New Year's Day and conceivably not have a compliance commitment agreement executed until Thanksgiving, all of just within the bounds of the timelines that are established there. And that doesn't even begin to necessarily get to the issue of on-site compliance, which could then be as long as 180 days after that. So one of the things that we've looked at internally, and we have some limitations that counties don't, but is trying to find more efficient ways of achieving compliance. Within the scope of the county's delegation agreements, we would encourage you all to evaluate those locally. It's slightly more difficult for us to pursue a criminal complaint than it may be for a county. Mm-hmm. That's a constitutional problem. It has to do with the fact that the Attorney General is the enforcement arm of the state, and all those type of activities have to be taken to them.
Sure.
But I mean, we have had some success with those in the past. But again, for us, it's a process. And so what we would encourage, and we've done this with a number of counties, is if you use the Section 31 style of inspection, and as part of that inspection, determine that there are more efficient local tools that allow you to achieve compliance, that you should definitely use those. Our ultimate objective is compliance with state law, mm-hmm. and that's contemplated by those agreements.
Can we make that decision on our own?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. As a county, not just me on my own, but as a county with our state's attorney and everything?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and this is a question that actually comes up a lot. Operationally, what that would look like would be that you could start off with an inspection that mirrors how we conduct inspections, mm-hmm. and then as part of the process and evaluating how to go forward, you exercise your individual judgment on the path to proceed. And so, in those instances, you would still submit inspection reports to us. The inspection report would be the inspection, and then the action up until the point of selecting a local remedy is all subject to reimbursement by the state. It's just once it goes to that non-state process, that it would have to be bifurcated out. But yeah, that's an entirely local call.
Okay. Yeah, because I just want to try to investigate that more, because some of the sites we deal with, these people don't understand even how to read an AC. They have no clue what they're even reading. There is not going to be a compliance commitment agreement from these people. These are non-permitted sites. You get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I mean the Section 31 process contemplates a level of sophistication that isn't necessarily shared across the board.
Correct.
And I mean, and that's one of the difficult realities of state law. It's almost sort of odd. I mean, most of our regulations, if you think about it, are set up targeting the lowest common denominator of actor. However, that factor though is determined by behavior, not by understanding of state law. And so, yeah, there are absolutely situations where the Section 31 process is counterintuitive because, again, based on your individual judgment, that the specific actors at issue don't have the programmatic capacity to be able to walk their way through a process that is effectively litigation at the outset.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Paul, can you guys see the chat?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. So you can address that maybe if you want from Marlon.
Yeah. Marlon has a question about the drone presentation, the sniffer drone. It says here, is airspace protected over a landfill, or could I hire this company to do atmospheric testing above the landfill? So, and I think in my experience with this situation, the landfill was the one doing this. So there was no question because they hired the people, but maybe we could address that then.
So this is actually a really good legal issue because because we're all government actors, this creates potential Fourth Amendment problems. This is something that's actually under review on our end. And so once there are atmospheric impacts, a scintilla of an inch off-site, then it is very clear that that's fair game. And as a government agency, we can, without notice to the property owner, do as much testing as we want. If you informed the landfill owner that you were going to be doing the testing, and they had no affirmative objection, then you could bring somebody in, and you'd be able to do that testing. In addition to that, if you're doing testing for the purpose of addressing a specific regulatory requirement, you would also be okay. There may just be, you could potentially have a very risk-averse state attorney who would highly encourage you to notify the landfill so that there weren't additional Fourth Amendment issues. But again, we're looking at the issue of whether somebody could, without notice, do that type of testing above a private property, and that's still under internal review because, with the advent of additional technologies, there are all of these constitutional issues that aren't necessarily things that we would even, as environmental regulators, have contemplated because, when you think Fourth Amendment, you think criminal law, not what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Isn't there a height for drones of any sort?
Yeah, I believe
that
so.
they have to fly above a property? I thought I remember hearing about that.
I think so. This is where I'm admittedly not as fluent in some of the obligations. We're just now developing our drone policy. So, yeah, candidly, you probably have a better understanding of that than I do beyond that very superficial level that I've got.
Right. And I think for Marlon's question, the sniffer drone is designed to do surface emissions of the landfill. So it would be right on the landfill property, pretty much 15 feet above the property. So I believe you'd probably want to get their permission to do that, I would think.
You can do like on-site surprise inspections, but if you're flying over the boundary and then unannounced during a check, that does create some Fourth Amendment problems.
I think they'd have some big problems with that. Yeah, because the sniffer drone does not go that high. I know it's nowhere near whatever height I thought I heard about how, like, where your private property ends in the airspace. The sniffer drone is well below that because there's a tube that goes down to the surface of the landfill.
Well, and something that just in looking at Marlon's question, I think we both have answered this in terms of an unannounced overview. If this was a tool that you're using as part of an announced inspection, then I think that you're in good shape. But I was implicitly reading into that that this would be unannounced and independent of any other on-site work.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Hopefully that helps, Marlon, with your question. Do we have any other enforcement issues or questions we could discuss with James, since we have him here on the top bin thing here? So
something if there aren't any other immediate questions, I can give some quick highlights of things that we're encountering or that we're contemplating, maybe working with the counties to see if you all have some interest in picking things up. I touched in the last session on the C&D bill and how that's going to impact that universe of regulated sites. Like with all the rest of our delegated work, as we go through the permitting process, as sites have their physical realities change, we'll keep the counties informed, especially to the extent that any of that could alter what the expectations might be for inspections. That all being said, there's a lot that is unchanged by that bill. historic interpretations of what is or is not material that is recoverable are still valid unless they're counteracted by the Pollution Control Board. And the board regs likely wouldn't take effect until sometime in 2023. So if you're currently inspecting 2238 sites, your day-to-day life isn't going to meaningfully change probably for at least another 18 months. So taking some of these questions in order. So Steve asks, can you discuss the legal limitations of using trail cameras for illegal dump sites? So this is somewhat related to some of the issues that we touched on with Marlon. I mean, it ultimately comes down to a private property access issue. I mean, as part of your delegated programs, the counties, like the agency, have the authority to enter property without based on individual complaints. And so in those cases, I mean, we can use cameras and drones to surveil what's going on site. There are some reasonable expectation of privacy issues that can be tied in with that. Most of those, though, end up being fact specific and are somewhat tied to things like actual enclosures. Some ways that those can be addressed are just through a combination of either clearly visible issues or really particularly framed complaints. I don't know, Steve, if that necessarily touches the maybe the fact pattern you got in mind, but I don't know, Paul. I don't know, you've been working with Steve. Do you have some background that might tie into that?
I think so. I think could a camera be placed somewhere off-site to do surveillance, like not on the property itself, but on like a utility pole or like a roadway or a tree off-site or just off the property or something?
So that's where it does get very fact specific. It would depend on the location of the camera, and that's where you would want to definitely check in with your state's attorney beforehand to ensure that there's not. Okay. Now, privacy issues are depending on the type of camera and whether you're picking up audio or not. Any would amount to wiretapping issues. The general principle, if you're installing a camera on something like a public roadway and it sees things that would be visible from that roadway, that's permissible. Okay. In that respect, it'd be similar to a red light camera picking up somebody doing something illegal on a private parking lot. There's no expectation of privacy because there are no barriers set up and cameras established on public property.
Public property, okay.
Once you get into private property, it's a little more complicated, and that's where you would want to have some input from your legal counsel to confirm that those facts don't meaningfully alter that general principle.
I think what Steve is talking about is trying to put something in the public domain that could surveil a private site, not really putting a camera on somebody's private property.
Yeah, and in those cases, in general, you're in good shape. The next derivative of that is if you have a helpful neighbor who offers up their private property for camera. In those cases as well, you're typically on legally sound ground, but there are some additional facts that could impair that, like the nature of the view from private residence property to alleged dumper's property, and the extent and breadth of the consent that private individual provided. But if you're looking at just a camera on public property that views things that are clearly visible to the naked eye, then 99.9% of the time you have sound footing.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Marlon asks, have there been many electronics enforcement actions against manufacturers, collectors other than Superior Battery and Morris? So this is an answer that's evolved over time. For collectors, the answer is that there haven't been many recent enforcement actions, but there have been historic enforcement actions. And what these have typically looked like have been situations involving a collector under the previous electronics recycling program that was not very judicious about what they were accepting or how frequently they were moving material. And they effectively were effectively accumulating anything and everything that arrived on site. We have pursued and been successful in enforcement actions on those fronts. We haven't run into that as much recently, but there's a little bit of artificial intelligence built into that. The collection network now is somewhat self-selecting. And so because of that, we don't have a roster of all statewide collections that are available because we have reason to understand that there are private collections outside of the manufacturer network. The way that we would be notified of those is complaint driven, and there's only one site that I can think of in the past 2 years where we have received a complaint related to electronics collections that were outside of the manufacturer program that were creating environmental issues. And in that instance, enforcement action has not yet been sought because it's still working its way through the process. But that's the type of site we would probably expect to see going forward. It seems highly unlikely you would have a collection site that's part of the CERA program be pulled into enforcement for at least for solid waste issues. Manufacturers are a little different. We've seen the same type of enforcement actions involving manufacturers as we have historically, and at roughly the same rate as we did in the past. These are normally registration issues where you have a manufacturer who either believes that their material is not subject to CERA, and it is, or the agency takes the position that it is, or a manufacturer that just doesn't want to register because they've taken the position that they are not selling in Illinois. In those instances, the agency does two things. First, if they're selling in Illinois and they're selling through an online retailer, we notify the retailer because the retailer could potentially be subject to enforcement as well. In those cases, we have agreements with Amazon, Walmart, Target, and some other large online sellers that if we provide them the information, they block sales to Illinois. In that case, that ends up addressing the factual issue, but CERA affords us the ability to directly refer things to the Attorney General rather than having to run them through Section 31. And in those cases, we do those direct referrals, and almost universally, they end up being settled by the manufacturer paying both their registration fee and then the statutory penalties for having failed to register. A enforcement item that we have not encountered that is conceivable but we haven't had reason to pursue yet would involve the manufacturers collectively doing something to frustrate the intent of the recycling program. In order to reach that point, what would happen would be that you would either have the manufacturers refusing to support collection locations, refusing to provide recycling, not submitting a collection or a program plan that is approvable within the appropriate window. There's some complications for this are tied into how CERA is framed. CERA, because it authorizes local governments to substitute out one-day events for their collection locations, as drafted, cannot be violated in that manner, likely until the end of December of the relevant program year. And so, for example, if because I saw her comments next, I'll pick on Sarah. So if Coles County elected to just do one-day events and was firm on wanting to have 4 one-day events, and the manufacturers informed Coles County that they are not intending to support those one-day events, and notified Coles County in August of the upcoming program year, September, and every month until December of the program year. CERA could not be in violation of CERA until December the 28th of the program year, because that's the first date on which it would be impossible for them to comply. That was a outcome that was not contemplated when CERA was drafted, and it's also not one that we've run into. But there are some very real linguistic issues with how that enforcement provision is written. And that's something that would likely be addressed when the law is set to sunset and it's revisited. So we don't anticipate that coming up. Jason Linnell's group have been very responsive and helpful in trying to establish these events to avoid that possibility. But as drafted, SERA creates this weird enforcement purgatory where you could potentially have a regulated group that openly acknowledges their future refusal to comply with state law, but that compliance date isn't triggered until the end of the year in which they were supposed to comply. I'm sure that's all clear, but it's a bizarre fact pattern, one that we haven't had to run into, but it's something that we have considered in instances where there have been some issues getting collections available. So Sarah asks, are there any workable enforcement techniques for drop-off recycling, or is this just a recycling program where contamination is unavoidable? Just having rampant problems with contamination within the county, and is looking at this from a potential, or coming from a non-enforcement background. So there aren't necessarily state enforcement techniques that directly address this fact pattern. But it's like with Steve's question, it ends up depending on the unique facts you're presented. If you have a recycling drop-off point that advertises that it'll take certain types of plastics and somebody brings styrofoam, then at that point, you'd likely need to pursue some sort of local enforcement mechanism, because unless it's mishandled in a manner that amounts to open dumping, then it wouldn't push state. Okay, so Sarah's facts, she notes that they're bringing trash to recycle at drop-offs. So at that point, again, sort of borrowing from Steve's point, that's open dumping. If you're bringing waste from offsite, leaving it somewhere where it is not authorized to be, and here it's clearly not authorized because it's advertised as a recycling site, that's open dumping, and that can be pursued through enforcement of the Environmental Protection Act, as well as in most cases local ordinances. It would be potentially difficult to identify the dumpers, and in cases like this, one of the unfortunate byproducts of state law is that the property owner ends up being equally responsible for the dumping, unless they're taking steps to minimize those type of activities. So, but yeah, state law does afford an avenue to address these. They could be handled as open dumping issues, like many of the other things that we see around the state. But you do end up absent a clearly identifiable and sometimes almost repeated individual actor. It can be hard to flag who is going to be the problem. Yeah, and so yeah, Steve said identifying the suspect can be very difficult. And so Marlon asks if we can use a trail camera to catch when the signage is available. Yeah, at that point, I mean, you've given notice. A lot of private businesses do this as well. Yeah, you've notified that there is no expectation of privacy, and if you can identify them, you can pursue for open dumping as well as for any locally available remedies.
Sarah, who does your enforcement stuff where you work at?
So Coles is not delegated, so it may be local public health.
Local public health, or
yeah,
or the EPA, the Illinois EPA, right?
Yeah, so that's the other thing.
Right.
If it's pervasive, we can absolutely step in. I mean, that's what we do for the 80 or so non-delegated counties.
Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. I don't even know where Coles County is at.
It is. It's southeast of Springfield. It's where Eastern Illinois University is.
Oh, is that Charleston? Okay, is that Coles? Okay. Very good. I see. Okay. Other questions or concerns on the enforcement side for James or anyone else?
Something else that we touched on. I know this came up at the meeting in 2019, I would reiterate it again. We have money available for delegated counties. Now there's some things that are attached to that. In order for us to be able to make the justification to bump beyond the most recent economic adjustments, we would need one of two things to occur: either an entirely new county to come online, which we have the money to be able to absorb several of those, actually, if counties are interested. And if so, absolutely reach out. We can give a tutorial of what the process looks like. And it ends up being a 5-year arrangement with funding available each year, provided some deliverables are met. For existing counties, though, the inclusion of additional work could result in us being able to provide some more money if the counties are open to that. We actually had a discussion about this probably about 15 months ago with most of the counties. And one of the concerns that we heard back was that unless we were able to provide enough money to pick up an entire new full-time employee, that there may not be an appetite for that. I understand that the agency has had the exact same conversations with US EPA when they've been in our position of the delegating agency, saying, "Hey, you can get more money if you do more work." Mm-hmm. If any of that has changed on the local level, let us know. Some of the things that we're considering being able to include as options that are available are underground storage tank and remediation project inspections. Those are very, very straightforward. In most cases, they end up just being an evaluation of whether the engineered barrier is still in place. And they can end up significantly driving up the number of sites that are included in your program without adding a tremendous amount of work. So that would be a potential avenue to justify additional funding. The other one has been, we've looked at various points on and off, including tire retailers. That's something that's still on the table. There's some administrative things actually on our end, now with the counties, that we have to iron out to be able to confirm the financing for that, because that would actually open up the opportunity for us to pull money from the used tire fund and provide it to the counties. But those are things that are available. During the Materials Management Advisory Committee, one of the points that we noted was that we're actually operating in a way right now where the appropriation that we've received historically for the delegated counties has a surplus of about $750,000. And the reason for that is that in the past, because of how things were impacted from the state budget impasse, a lot of bills were being paid behind. And so in some cases, you needed the over appropriation to cover past bills. Now, though, we're able to pay, we're paying the bills in a timely manner. And the totality of our obligations to the counties ends up at under what that historic amount had been. Nonetheless, the General Assembly continues to provide us that amount of money. And so we're able to use it, provide it, as long as we can provide some additional justification. And it's something that, feel free to take that back to your teams, mull it over, and then let me know if you want to have that conversation. And then what we would do is we could rework the agreements or rework the financing. It would take immediate effect, and then you'd be able to be reimbursed toward that higher figure.
Okay, thank you.
Then
I think Marlon has a question here. And then Becky chimed in about giving people violation notices for not breaking down boxes. So if you can give a violation notice for that, you can give a violation for dumping trash, right?
Yep.
So Marlon had a question about the MMAC. The EPA will be collecting data of waste generation, county by county or regional, and how will counties get that data?
So this would take a couple of potential avenues. So any data that we have on this front will end up being posted on our website. Right now, we're examining what our best option is to be able to actually employ this to roll this out. In reality, it's most likely that we'd have to take a regional approach just because of the difficulty in obtaining some county-specific information. In talking with Shantanu in the build-up to finalizing the MMAC report, one of the things that he said is that in a lot of instances, county data was extrapolated based on assumptions made from overlaying data from comparably situated counties. So the preference would be to try to have it something that's county by county specific, but the world in which we live doesn't necessarily accommodate that. But once we have that information available, it'll be on our website. And then one of the things that Pete and I talked through this morning is that we're going to definitely be using each other's platforms to share information. So once it's available, we'll advertise it, but we'll also have Pete push it to the ILCSWMA membership.
Okay.
And so Steve asked, are there any changes proposed for landfill capacity certification reporting forms to require more specific data on waste streams and whether or not fees are paid on those waste streams? And then who's compiling the report for the agency right now? This is it's a multifaceted issue. Right now, the capacity information and fees are reported independently. We're actually working with our Department on Innovation Technology to try to blend those into a single online reporting platform. Right now, we have two different reporting mechanisms which were established by different IT contractors, and we're trying to marry those in a way that allows our reporting to ensure consistency across the board. So we're not having to compare documents when we have computers that can compare them for us. Once we get the clearance to move forward on that, like with some of our other reports, we're going to send around the draft contents of what we'd like to see for input. And then once we get feedback on those, we'll append the proposal as needed. But I mean, Steve's point is a sound one. I mean, it's helpful for us to be able to have this additional waste stream information. There's a lot of policy, but then also enforcement bases that would be well served by that. And so we're absolutely exploring how we can do that, particularly given some of the difficulties that we encountered in examining potential litigation for violations of or alleged violations tied to underpayment of fees.
Now, I think, James, you touched on that earlier this morning, didn't you?
Yeah.
A little bit with the new bill. And maybe I didn't catch it. Maybe I didn't understand. But is there traction on some of those past fee issues with the statewide with statewide on the landfills where they would be required to pay fees on more of this stuff that goes in there that really is not recycling? Of course, it's just going into the landfill. I think I might have missed that. So
yes. So effective mid-July, the C&D material that was previously landfilled without fees being paid is going to be subject to fee. And so if that material was sent to a landfill on June 30th, there is I'm trying to frame this correctly. There is a legal debate about whether that material should have been subject to fee or not. Mm-hmm. However, once the governor signed Senate Bill or House Bill 1089, it is now the law of Illinois that all that material is subject to landfill fees. Okay. One of the things that we heard from waste industry was that their systems weren't necessarily yet set up to be able to differentiate between that when they were paying fees. And so they didn't assess fees on everything that came in. What's been relayed and what they have reiterated back to us that they understand is that that doesn't matter. The material was subject to fee. They had to pay us the fees. And so they have until the end of the reporting year to be able to do that. And then going forward, that flexibility doesn't necessarily as cleanly apply. The basis for that is that we're reading some of the payment provisions that authorize what really amount to catch-up fee payments fourth quarter to govern this, given some of the awkwardness of when the bill was signed. And then Steve asked who's compiling the annual report. Right now, that is Allison Fry. She came on board about a year ago now and handled the report that was issued earlier this year. And she's actually working right now to do some reimagining of the document to be more inclusive of other information that's reported to the agency. So it's not just the raw landfill data, but instead it'll incorporate composting information, information on other waste streams that we accumulate. It'll be more of an overview of the waste and materials reporting that comes to the agency, and not exclusively raw landfill data. And actually, I'll put her contact info in here so that everybody's got it.
Thank you. I see it. It's on there.
Okay.
Okay. On the landfill issue, and I'm not sure if you can address this or not. The last couple of years, we've had issues with odors with some of the big landfills around our area and stuff. And, we talked about that quite frequently, and the different violation notices that have been sent, and, going to the Attorney General, and that takes, an ungodly amount of time to get figured out and stuff. But we've routinely been told that we don't need to quantify those odors. We don't need to use centimeters. We're not messing with that section. I think it's 245 from like the 1970s or something.
Yeah.
Is that still? We're not going to be using that going forward, I don't think. And then the way we cite landfills for odors is the way we've been doing it. Is that adequate? Is that enough?
Yeah, so from everything that I've seen, that's workable. The one, and this is some of this may be background that folks who are on already know, but the issue that we run into is that absent some sort of statewide standards, trying to superimpose anything other than sort of a reasonable person approach as to when you are at the landfill creates unnecessary regulatory problems, which is why the agency doesn't do it. State law requires us to adopt by rule anything that we use as a standard of general applicability. And so if we were to say that we're going to go out to facilities and when evaluating odors, use centimeters, and if something comes back at a certain level, that level is our enforcement threshold. That's actually a violation of state law, and the agency could be subject to financial penalties for that.
Okay.
And so to avoid that, everything ends up being very site and fact specific. And then as delegated partners, you all are very effectively carrying out just as we would.
Sure.
But it's hard because, that cuts the other way, is that who is the reasonable person, and how valid are their observations if somebody else was on site and they attest that they didn't have that same experience. So
right.
These are among the hardest enforcement matters to prove up because they're so factually fleeting.
Right, and it seems like there's been more reliance on just the complaints of interference with life and the air pollution regulation, that things can't affect people's quality of life or health that are in the air. That seems to be one of the main things that has been relied on for that.
Yeah. And that's because there's enough history with that. That ends up being the most effective lever, at least as of today.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. Other questions for James? Anybody? We got about 30 people on here. It seems like it's quarter till right now. I think so. There's been some productive things here, but anything else we can discuss on the enforcement side?
Yeah, after I go through my notes, I think that we've covered that even just through the questions, the things that I had for to make sure that we went through this morning.
Oh, good. Well, again, it's about 10:45, and I think we're doing something at 11 with the solar panels, and I guess we take a little break now, and we'll see everybody back on that stage platform or stage screen later on, I suppose.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you.